So March just ended and the box office is booming. That is actually not true. But a lot of people did watch Electric State on Netflix, so humanity disappoints once again. But I did start off this month watching No Country for Old Men, which, hot take, is very good. This is, of course, the Coen scoreless contemporary western where Javier Bardem hunts down Josh Brolin while Tommy Lee Jones mumbles about evil. And yeah, this is awesome. This is about as simple and tense as a movie can be. This is probably the most well-constructed cat and mouse game ever put to screen, and while it seems distant and cold, that mysterious quality does open the door to questions of fate, violence, and obviously, why can't Tommy Lee Jones enunciate anything? I think one of the great debates in movies now is whether this deserved to be There'll Be Blood for Best Picture in 2008. And honestly, I go back and forth so much that I usually just don't really care anymore. Both movies are phenomenal and both are oddly similar in that they're very callous takes on human nature that have a sneaky sense of humor. So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to rewrite history here, but they're good movies. Boogie Nights is obviously a staple of my movie diet given I am in my early 20s, and it's because there are few movies that do this many things. Boogie Nights is an ensemble piece about a bunch of broken people who work in the adult film industry and all of the funny and horrible things that happen in their lives. While I think Paul Thomas Anderson's work in the second half of his career are maybe more singular, this just being a full-on Robert Altman meets Scorsese party epic results in one of the most rewatchable films of all time. The period piece elements are perfect and the short stories connected to all of these characters are touching and strangely relatable. I get that some people are kind of hesitant whenever it comes to the subject matter here, but I also think that hesitancy kind of results in an interesting test of judgment. This movie takes your preconceptions, plays with them throughout, and by the end, if you still don't understand these people, then you just might not be listening. Mickey 17 is Bong Joon-ho's newest after Oscar winner Parasite, and I think is really the synthesis of Ho's English works. This is a sci-fi satirical cloning story about unethical labor, colonialism, animal rights, and of course, Donald Trump. That's right, there's a lot going on, and while it's probably not the most fine-tuned version of itself, I do think that the anger present here is pretty cathartic. And if you had been keeping up with the rollout of Mickey 17, then you know that it has been pushed back a lot, and after seeing it, I think it's kind of easy to see why. There are a lot of very on-the-nose political ideas present that post the 2024 elections sadly don't entirely hold up, but even though there's a lot of political and social baggage embedded in this film, the performances, score, and energetic filmmaking never slow things down. This is certainly in the bottom half of Bong Joon-ho's filmography, but it's also the perfect movie that you make after winning Best Picture. No one else could make this movie, and that is one of the best things you can say about a movie. And yeah, I like when Mark Ruffalo does a silly voice. Lady Bird is Greta Gerwig's perfectly awkward coming-of-age story about a senior in high school played by Saoirse Ronan, as she is incredibly difficult to be around while also being charming and understandable. There are actually portions of this movie that are oddly difficult to watch, but not really in the typical way. It's kind of like whenever you're hanging out with your friend at their place and then they start arguing with their parents and you kind of just want to get out of there. No one is covering their eyes watching Lady Bird, but the familiar relationships read so true that you feel like you're watching a moment between two people that you should not be watching. But this is also super funny and sweet. John Bryan's score is calming and reassuring, like there's just so much to love about this movie. Every side character has some kind of sad shit going on that stops you from judging too hard. Ultimately, Lady Bird is an endorsement of kindness, and that might seem smaller than it should, but sometimes the simple virtues are what deserve the most of our attention. Okay, so you might be thinking, wow, you've only watched good movies so far. Well, that streak has come to an end. Accidental Love is directed by David O. Russell, a man of many highs and lows. He directed one of my favorite movies, Silver Linings Playbook, and he also made this. So, inspiration, it comes and goes. And this movie was actually shot in 2008 and then took 7 years to be released, which is not usually the best recipe for success. Accidental Love is a half-spoof satirical take on a rom-com as Jessica Biel gets a nail stuck in her head and now does weird things. So will she be able to find love? And it's just clear that no one knew what they were doing with this. No performers on the same page and every scene just feels like it's from a different movie. I feel like maybe with a little more thought and more transgressive elements, this could have been an interesting satire, but as it stands, it's a movie in limbo. I mean, making movies is really hard and I like everybody who was a part of this film, but this just did not come together in any way. I would say more about Accidental Love, but I think David O. Russell would prefer I not. I watched Saturday Night again to solidify my feelings on it, and yeah, my feelings were solidified. I would love to love this movie. I think there's an infectious energy, some good filmmaking, and a couple of good performances, but I also think that it's not what it should be. Saturday Night is a chronicling of the hour and a half before the premiere of Saturday Night Live in 1975. This could have been a really cool hangout movie where we watch talented actors play off one another, or it could have been a much more realistic take on the origins of Saturday Night Live. But instead, everything is false while also relying on the Easter eggs of cameos and knowing lines of dialogue. Obviously, some zany comic things happened on the set of Saturday Night Live, but this movie treats everyone like an animal. Most of this movie is watching a bunch of dumb people run around making noises, and then at the end, we're supposed to clap for the great comedy-defining institution of SNL. This is a movie that is constantly lying to you for no reason, and eventually you're just like, can you please stop? I think there are elements that work, and a couple of Easter eggs are, pretty fun, but I'm just not sure this is what it should have been. Beatrice at Dinner follows Selma Hayek as Beatrice, a holistic worker, as she has dinner with a bunch of rich people who are doing bad things. The reason I watched this is because it's written by Mike White, who wrote White Lotus, School of Rock, and Brad Status, all three of which I'm very fond of. He also wrote the Emoji Movie. So, everybody needs to make money. But this is clearly a part of his more mature work. I think the thing about this film, after having seen White Lotus, is that Beatrice at Dinner does just kind of feel like a test run for that. This is an exercise in class critique through limited locations, and most of the time is biting and unique, while a couple of moments seemed a little bit stale. The tone is all over the place here, and the climax seems like it came from a different film, but even with all these critiques, I respect it. The performers are taking this seriously, and Miguel Arteta knows how to set the stage for maximum cringe. I like this kind of movie, and I think Beatrice at Dinner did this kind of movie well. Licorice Pizza is a movie that I like to watch whenever it starts to get nice outside, and it always hits. This just feels like summer. It depicts a lot of pretty messed up cultural standards as it takes place in the early 70s, but that doesn't stop the genuine nostalgia that it exudes. This is a hangout movie. Yes, it's a legally questionable romance as well, but mechanically it works as 70s portraiture in which teen boys go on adventures. The unrest mixed with freedom, the fear mixed with ambition. Every idiosyncratic tendency of the 1970s is on full display here, and it has never looked better. A common criticism of Licorice Pizza is that it's disjointed, and yeah, that's true. This is episodic and doesn't feature an easily identifiable structure, but you just gotta be down for the proceedings, which I am every time I watch it. Black Bag was just the perfect March movie. It's Steven Soderbergh's newest after Presence, which I also really enjoyed. This is a spy thriller where a lot of people lie and plot happens, and it just looks so good. This is slick and precisely put together. All of the actors are game, and there are 3 or 4 sequences that are pitched perfectly. I must say that I didn't always know what was happening. Like, they just kept on saying Severus a bunch, and I was just like, okay, I guess that's happening. But I was just able to coast on the imagery, the performances, and dialogue. This is destined to not be a success at the box office, and I think that that's a shame. Black Bag has the ability to entertain a lot of people. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a 4-quadrant movie, but this is a brisk, tense, and witty thriller that most people just won't go see because they don't go see movies. The Parenting is a movie that in some ways I admire because it's a throwback movie starring more people than it should, but ultimately it is just kinda cheap. The jokes here are fine as this Meet the Parents meets Beetlejuice type thing, and some of the spooky imagery is okay, but nothing truly strikes a chord. This is written by a former SNL writer in Kent Sublett, and the wit is evident. There are many jokes that work here, but there are just as many kind of throwaway lines. I don't know, there's not a whole lot to say here other than it begins and then ends abruptly. Red Rocket is Sean Baker's film released before Best Picture winner Anora, and it's easy to see why Red Rocket was not a Best Picture winner. It's all about a washed-up adult film actor played by Simon Rex returning to his hometown in Texas where he can continue to be a bad person. person. And yeah, that is what the movie is about. It's a meandering look at the small town in Texas, and it's often engaging and interesting while still being maybe a little bit too long. That being said, it mainly just works as a comedy. I laugh a lot while watching this film while still recognizing the sadness at its core. Red Rocket isn't in the business of apologizing for or preaching to its characters. Instead, you just get a look into what they're up to. It's not always nice or pretty, but that doesn't stop the clear humanity from peeking through. Borderline is the first feature from Jimmy Warden and is a thriller comedy about an obsessed fan of a pop star played by Samara Weaving as he breaks into her house and, does weird things as characters in this type of movie do. So I was on board for, I would say, most of this movie. It's clearly playing around with structure in a sometimes fun way, and there are a couple shot compositions or editing choices that are undeniably cool, but nothing really comes together in a substantial way. This just feels like plot strung together by some good performances and some jokes that can entertain some people. Like, it's kind of tough to be mad at Borderline because I genuinely think the first two acts are pretty solid, but it's also a movie that's kind of tough to be excited about. I think it's a good directorial debut and certainly has some merit, but I do think it would have just been a better short film. But I will say that Borderline only costs $5 million, a budget that makes sense. For this next movie, I cannot say the same. Electric State is the newest from the Russo brothers and is a Netflix original that costs $320 million. I would say that I see the money on screen. The only problem is that I do not. Electric State is a road trip adventure with Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt as they are boring and are trying to get to her brother in the midst of a robot battle. But guess what? There are evil humans too, but also humans and robots can live together because I guess that they can smile. So a lot of people have been calling this garbage, and I think technically it isn't complete garbage. Like, it's put together in a way that has signs of competency for sure, but there is no amount of inspiration or thought put into this that deserves a $320 million budget. It is a problem that this is a movie in its current form. There's just a strong feeling of brain damage when looking at Electric State. Nothing adds up, there is no poetry, it's cliche ridden and yet all over the place. The only thing that works is some of the designs, but guess what? That's taken from the illustrative novel. So like, who or what is this movie for? It's here so that Netflix can have another movie that Chad and marketing can say was pretty good. Electric State should have been an atmospheric and exciting exercise in world building, but instead it's broad, unfun schlock. I then watched Triple X: The Return of Xander Cage, and you might be thinking, why did you do this? And to that I would say, do you always know why you do the things that you do? No. No, you don't. So this is the third in the Triple X franchise, a franchise that you probably didn't know was a franchise, and features Vin Diesel playing Xander Cage, a fifth grader who happens to have the physiology of a man in his mid-50s. And I really wanted to like this. I love a movie that is so bad it's good, and sometimes this reaches that. Like, there are probably 4 really good laughs in here, but most of the time it's just kind of hollow and boring. Every line is just nonsense, and it's really only here to pander to men who think they're a badass. The action is just not very good, and I hope that I forget I ever saw it, but sadly I'm not usually that lucky. I try not to hate too much, but Vin Diesel to me is just a very off-putting figure, and even in these divided times, I think that we can all agree on that. Lady Vengeance is a film by Park Chan-wook, the man behind Old Boy, Decision to Leave, and The Handmaiden, and this is the first movie of his that I have not enjoyed. So the main theme of Lady Vengeance is indeed vengeance. It's very subtle. It's all about a woman wrongly accused of murder taking vengeance on the serial killer who framed her. And that is obviously a very compelling and proven revenge concept. But sadly, as is conveyed here, is overwritten and unfocused. Now, I understand what it's trying to say about the psychology of revenge, and in the third act, it does take a somewhat clever turn, but it really does feel like too little too late. Its tone is all over the place, and while some of the craft elements are impressive, especially the composition and production design, the tonal whiplash and overly dramatic choices result in a movie that I wanted to end about 30 minutes in. On the Rocks is a Sofia Coppola movie that came out in 2020, and as such, no one talked about it. And that's a shame. This is great. It is a spiritual successor to Lost in Translation, which is actually one of my favorite movies. And yeah, maybe when compared to that film, it doesn't completely hold up, but I also really enjoyed returning to it. It's a very gentle dramedy that features some great dialogue between Bill Murray and Rashida Jones as they play a father and daughter investigating her husband to find out if he's cheating. The atmosphere is thick flick, and while some might say nothing happened, I don't think that at all. Sure, it's quaint and isn't about saving the world, but it is about many real things. It's about accepting people for their faults and how the past affects us in obvious but unavoidable ways. This might not be as revelatory as Lost in Translation, but it's a really good time, and I wish we got more movies with this calmer approach to a midlife crisis. I did a rewatch of Anora now that it's on Hulu, and I watched it with my parents, which, no, I wouldn't completely recommend that. As I said, this is the most recent Best Picture winner, and I don't hate that. This is an energetic and thoroughly examined film that is structurally intriguing in ways that most movies just aren't. It's about a sex worker named Annie as she is pretty much screwed over and all of the people that kinda go down with her. It's concerned with the cyclical nature of class inequality, and I think its simplicity is very warranted, even though its simplicity does result in the 2-hour and 20-minute runtime being slightly unearned. But I mean, I think that's just a trend with Sean Baker movies. He makes long movies. Even though I think most people were betting on Anora to win Best Picture come Oscar night, it's still a very unconventional winner, but I also think that that's really cool. Also, Sean Baker using his multiple speeches to highlight independent cinema, I mean, that's what everybody on that stage should be doing. So if you haven't watched Anora, I mean, yeah, I recommend it. Me and the Academy. Just maybe don't watch it with your parents. That's probably the best advice I can give. Snow White currently has a 1.6 out of 10 on IMDb. I'm sure all of those reviews are level-headed and unbiased. So this is a remake of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with quite a few added elements. Oh, and this time Snow White isn't a white person. And I don't really care that Snow White isn't a white person, and not that it's an indication of my political ideology or any sort of social standing. It's more so the fact that I just don't give a fuck about Snow White. And you know who else doesn't really care about Snow White? Most people. The original Disney film is a classic for sure and will forever have a place in pop culture as the first full-length animated feature, but it doesn't exactly hold up. It's boring. And I don't think it's boring because of its outdated politics or improper social ideology. It's boring because it's not a particularly funny, interesting, or thematically resonant film. It's a movie that is driven by its visuals and imagination, but those visuals have since been dethroned and that imagination has since been topped. It is a children's film that's mostly enjoyed through the lens of film history. But do you know what children don't have? The lens of history. And you can say that's not true. I love Snow White, but ultimately, if you just sat someone down and told them we're gonna watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and then they watched it, do you know what the most likely outcome is? They will fall asleep. So with that prologue, let's actually talk about this new movie. It's not great. I mean, I would even say it's not good. This is by Mark Webb, a guy who makes good movies when the budget isn't over $100 million. And so I don't think it's good to blame him for all of this because this is clearly a movie made by committee. The interesting part about Snow White is that it actually has addressed many of my problems with the previous Disney live action remakes. I used to hate how nobody in these movies could sing, but I think Rachel Zegler is a really great singer. And I used to hate how these movies were much more one-to-one recreations, but there are actually some changes done here that I thought could have panned out pretty well. The problem is that nothing really gels together. The dwarves, or I guess miners in this version, are poorly designed to say the least and are photographed in a way that does not do that design any favors. Nothing is really funny, nothing is too charming, it's just kind of nothing. I don't think that this is an assassination of the original at all. If anything, I wish that it was. That would have been interesting and something worth investigating, but this is just a passive children's film that has some nice messages and might tap into a very slight sense of nostalgia, but is entirely flimsy and in no way matches the price tag. Opus is the newest from A24 and is a cult film, and follows Ayo Edebiri playing a journalist who is invited to do a story on a cult led by John Malkovich, who is of course playing a crazy person. So this movie has been getting some hate. It's been called derivative and stale. And ultimately, I agree with that. But also, after watching Electric State and Triple X The Return of Xander Cage, you kind of just realize your place in the universe. And then all of a sudden, Opus really isn't too bad. Even so, this is just kind of a half-baked movie. The tagline of Opus is, "There's no cult-like celebrity." And that's a good tagline as kind of just a little idea within itself. This movie should have expanded on it. Sadly, it does not. Instead, Opus has the weight of one sentence. And it sometimes looks good along the way and has a pretty neatly composed score. The performers are also really giving it their all, but sadly, the script could have used a couple more revisions. The production design of the cult is overall well realized, but the practices and ideology are barely tapped into. The reason why Midsommar works so well is because you can see why the cult is able to lure people in. In Opus, this cult is just kinda nonsense, and sometimes that's done so to comedic effect, but it usually just feels tired. I think the ending offers an interesting idea concerning the role of media, but it's not enough and kinda just comes out of nowhere. There's a good version of Opus in another universe, but in that universe, it came out 10 years ago and is 15 minutes shorter. Death of a Unicorn is kind of like a mix between Triangle of Sadness and Jurassic Park, and for what it is, I think it can scratch a very specific kind of itch. It's all about Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega as a father and daughter who have to navigate a vengeful unicorn and a rich pharmaceutical family. So I think the number one thing that this movie does right is that it's about unicorns. And while the mythology that this movie sets up doesn't always work, it's still unique. I mean, we don't get many unicorn movies, so while it's here, we kind of got to give it props. The thing is that while the unicorn angle is unique, this whole class critique through bumbling rich people isn't as fresh as it was 5 years ago. Some of the humor still works, and there are a couple lines of dialogue that are worth some amount of thought, but this is ultimately a very passive experience. The comedy is pretty okay. The suspense is pretty okay. I think Death of a Unicorn will please most people, but I can't help but feel like there's some potential that was lost. I will say that the violence was pretty awesome though. So if you just want to watch a unicorn rip like at least 5 people apart, I mean, that's a very interesting want, but this movie's got it. Working Man is a film by David Ayer, a man who used to have thoughts and now does not, and is a movie in which Jason Statham is an ex-soldier who hunts down human traffickers. Now, I'm not really sure if it's very subtle, but Working Man is, it's trying to acquire a more blue-collar audience. I'm not sure if most people are kind of able to get that. This is man's man fodder where Jason Statham grunts and is broadly morally sound and teaches bad men a lesson. And you know what? Sometimes that type of movie really treats me right. The thing with Working Man is that it is uncontrollably stupid, but worst of all, is boring. Every line of dialogue is just cliche trash. Scenes don't really lead into the next very well, and for what should have been an incredibly simple action movie is overstuffed with useless plot beats. And even the action is kind of rushed and not edited well, which was honestly shocking because I am kind of a part of the cult of The Beekeeper. The Beekeeper is not a masterpiece, but it moves and constantly has some stuff going on that is worth laughing at, and the action is surprisingly solid. Working Man is just plain. I think Working Man will definitely find its people, but sad to report, I am not one of them. All right, well, that is another month down, another month that I've lived through, which is always just a great thing to think about. But keep on trucking. I hope life throws you something that's like cool and fun. You know, that'd be neat, I think. And you know, I would love to see you in the next video, but if not, that's okay. I thank you for watching this one.